Welcome to Public Speaking with Peter George. Do you want to be calm, confident, and credible every time you speak in public? Then stay tuned as Peter and his guests discuss public speaking tips, techniques, and tactics that help you increase your impact, influence, and income. Here's your host, the author of The Captivating Public Speaker, Peter George.
Are you active on LinkedIn? If you are you leveraging your presence to get leads? Or like many, have you merely included your basic job information, such as companies, titles, and employment dates? Well, no matter how you're utilizing the platform, listen in and discover how Daniel Alfon says you can increase your exposure, credibility, and your business with a change in mindset and a few tweaks to your profile. Daniel shows business owners and other professionals how to gain new clients with the power of LinkedIn. Through his programs and done-for-you premium packages, he helps executives and entrepreneurs grow their businesses. Daniel is the author of Build a LinkedIn Profile for Business Success. He joined LinkedIn in early 2004 and publishes articles, interviews, and exclusive content about advanced LinkedIn strategies to his clients and subscribers to his website. Here's my conversation with Daniel Alfon. Hi, Daniel. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you very much, Peter.
Daniel, we're going to talk about how speakers can use LinkedIn and how it might help them build their business. What do you mean by treat your profile like a website, not a CV?
So if we're talking about experienced public speakers or novices that only start public speaking, instead of thinking about their LinkedIn profile as a way to show they worked for company X or company Y, my suggestion is simply to look at their profile and make it a website or another website if they already have a website. And you ask one simple question: how do I convert my ideal reader into performing the action I would like them to perform? And that takes a small mind shift, not a CV, but a website. Who's my ideal reader, the event organizer, the corporate XYZ? What action would I like them to perform? Reach out to me, book a gig, whatever is the case. And am I making it as easy as possible for them to understand that instantly? For example, when I look at your own LinkedIn profile, I see a beautiful banner, I see the book. It takes my eyes less than 1 second to register that. So that's a very simple thing that any public speaker can immediately accomplish. Go to your profile and upload a banner that makes people understand what you speak about.
I know when I first got on LinkedIn, which was many years ago, my first thought was, let me list everything I've done. And it looked like a resume. And that's not why I was on there. And of course, that's what LinkedIn first was for. So it was set up that way. And I think it leads many of us to that idea. But most of us are not putting our resume on there to get a job.
The fact that it is a good place for job hunters or job seekers or recruiters doesn't prevent us from deciding if LinkedIn is here to serve us, Peter and Daniel, our audience, then what is the best way we can do that?
What I hear from a lot of people is when they're talking about getting exposure for speakers, one of the first things that comes up is LinkedIn.
Yeah, one thing you need to remember is that whenever we run a Google search for the speaker's name, in many, many cases, Peter, their LinkedIn profile would top the list. Even if they had TED Talks like you have, even then, the LinkedIn profile is often it could be number one. So you need to manage it. You need to be purposeful about it and not let LinkedIn call the shots. You, as a public speaker, need to call the shots. You need to make it shine.
Let me back up just a little bit. What's a CV?
A CV would emphasize the fact that between 1990 and 2005, you worked for the Collectible Source Publishing. The website would say, because I have a lot of experience publishing and editing and writing, when I published my book, The Captivating Public Speaker, I made my book better, or I'm able to work with public speakers who are also authors because of that experience. And instead of just highlighting the achievements you have as a job seeker, you would try to translate or show the resemblance or what you've taken from that experience that qualifies you to help potential public speakers or public speakers in short. So it may look the same, but you would read it differently.
Yeah, there's a nuance to it.
Yes, sir. That's it.
What's the best way to use a headline? How's it going to help you get the attention you need?
I'm so glad you asked it because our headline in terms of LinkedIn is the most expensive real estate we have. And by default, our headline, any public speaker's headline would simply say owner XYZ. So John Doe Consulting XYZ, but it's not as interesting for the reader as the headline you should write. And yours says award-winning author, public speaking coach. And I see that within 2 seconds. Because even when we run a search, the only meaningful information we have before even visiting your profile, Peter, is the headline. So make your headline count. Think about your ideal reader. Think about the first thing you'd like that person to understand or to learn about you, and make sure that this is visible up front and center in your profile headline. That's a very important first step.
Now, what should we focus on? Because we have options. We can focus on our company page or our individual page or our individual profile.
Is it okay if I make life simpler for our audience here?
Of course.
Great. So forget about the company page. Set it up, check it out every 6 months. But if you're a public speaker and you don't work for a corporate Fortune 500 company, your LinkedIn profile is the engine that will give you gigs, exposure, and stages. The company page can be set, but you have a lot more followers on your LinkedIn profile than you have on your company page. And that is the case for almost all LinkedIn members. Your page has dozens of followers, but you as an individual, Peter, have thousands and thousands of followers. So set it up, but understand that your LinkedIn profile is way more important than your page. And that is one of the peculiar things about LinkedIn. People who migrate to LinkedIn from other platforms don't really understand why that is the case, but your profile is way, way more important.
Speaking about the profile, just the way LinkedIn is set up, it leads us to talk about ourselves. So how can we make our profile viewer-friendly?
The first sentence in my own book is your profile is not about you. It does belong to you. But what I meant is that you need to understand who your ideal reader is and then rewrite or edit or tweak your profile in a way that answers their questions, preferably in the order they ask themselves. So what is it that you do? Is it relevant to us? How can I get in touch with you? This is roughly the order for most people. And it boils down to 3 simple questions. Question number 1, who's my ideal reader? For some people that are experienced public speakers, it could be the event organizers. For others who may start out, it could be maybe regional or local event organizer, maybe the Chamber of Commerce, maybe organizations around their state or their region. And then you ask yourself the second question, what action would I like that person to perform if they bump into my profile? And there's so many obstacles there that make it difficult for people to find us, to understand what we bring to the table, and be able to reach out to us. And the good news is that you can easily take away those obstacles. You just need to think about it. And a very small quick suggestion I would make is to ask someone you're not connected to show you how your LinkedIn profile looks from their app or their desktop in a Zoom call. That would take them 2 minutes. And then you ask them, what would you do if you were looking for a public speaker and you've never met me, and you didn't know anything about me? And you listen to their answers, and even before that, you see what they see. Because it doesn't matter what you see on your profile, Peter. What is important is what other people see. For example, a number of LinkedIn members don't have their profile photo visible to anyone on LinkedIn. So you would try to rack your brain and say, why can't that person see my profile photo? And according to LinkedIn statistic, any LinkedIn user with a profile photo, it has up to 24 more chances of being looked at or discovered. So it's not marginal. You need to make sure that the profile photo is professional, like yours, and is visible, like yours. So simply go to your profile, click on the photo, and see whether that photo's visibility is set to all LinkedIn members or just first-degree connections. And if that's the case, then turn it on or show the whole world your profile photo and make sure that what other people see makes them understand why they need to reach out to you.
That makes perfect sense. When I come across a profile that doesn't have a photo, I often think I'm not going to get much from it because they haven't even put their photo up. How much more information would there be in the profile?
You're absolutely right. They tend to be less up to date, and nobody likes to lose time. So we need to make it as easy, as frictionless as possible for them to make it a no-brainer. Yes, I need to reach out to Peter. How do I do that? Thank you very much.
Daniel, I think that all social media platforms have myths that go along with them. What myths are there about LinkedIn?
There are so many. Perhaps one that could be relevant is about content sharing on LinkedIn. If you think about content, then on most social media platforms, content is what drives engagement, and you need to share very often in order for people to see you. While that is a viable option for LinkedIn, you can also gain a lot of exposure and gigs and stages, not by simply sharing content, but by running advanced searches, finding the ideal person you'd like to speak with. And if you connect with people you know well, you will see in many cases people you can reach out to and ask them to introduce you to your ideal reader. So, for example, when I look at your own profile, I personally see 6 or 7 people. If I look at them and I have no idea who they are, I'm not able to even ask them for an introduction. But if I see Jason Sircone or Johnny Ball or Andrea Petrut or Jason Barnard or VJ Kalish or Dvorlansky, and I know who they are, then I'm able to leave the LinkedIn platform, ask how they've been, and ask someone, could you please, I'm very interested in speaking with Peter George or being a guest on his podcast. Would you mind sharing an email or making an introduction? Do you feel Peter, do you know Peter well enough to make that introduction? And if they say yes, then the meaningful conversation I will have begins thanks to their name, not mine. So content is one great way to get more exposure, but it doesn't have to be the only one. There are many other ways to gain stages and paid speaking gigs that are not related to content.
Have you heard what noted speakers and readers are saying about Peter's book, The Captivating Public Speaker? An incredible resource full of practical and easy-to-implement advice. Something for everyone, no matter what your current skill level is. Will help you achieve the results you've been striving for. After this episode, please use the link in the show notes to check out The Captivating Public Speaker on Amazon. Now, back to Peter and his guest.
What are some of the upsides and downsides, for that matter, of connecting with people that you don't really know? I hear advice on both sides of this.
Cool. So the question I would ask is, Peter, if you had to pick one in 3 years' time, would you like to be the most connected or the best connected? If you had to pick one, because most public speakers are afraid to make a choice and they want to have both. The problem with trying to aim for both is that you end up with very little of either. So if you want to have a large network that basically gives you exposure, whenever you publish a book, whenever you're on someone's show, whenever you publish something, then many people will see it, and that's fine. The other way to go about it is to connect with people you know well, and that limits the quantity of your network, but enables you to gain introductions to people you know. And if you haven't decided and you try to aim for both, then what happens often is that you only gain marginal exposure, because instead of 200, you would have 2,000 connections. And at the end of the day, that is not necessarily a lot on LinkedIn, while diluting or watering down the quality of your network in a way that you will no longer be able to gain a meaningful introduction to someone. So think long-term. If you had to pick one, is it most connected or is it best connected? Each way can drive traffic and exposure and contracts and dollars, but they're mutually exclusive.
I've never heard it put that way before about being mutually exclusive.
When you think of it, if you grow your network, then you can no longer know everyone really well, most of us. And if you limit the quantity of network to people you know well, then it cannot be 6,000 or 20,000 people. You can't. So you need to pick one. And I know it's you pay a price. You have to ask yourself whether you'd like to limit it before you connect or after you connect. Because if you connect with many people, then that means you may be asked to introduce people you don't really know, or you will be asked to perform all sorts of actions for people you don't really know well. So there is a price that comes with a quality network, and there's also a price that comes with a quantity network. And you need to be aware of the price before finding or selecting the connection strategy that suits your long-term needs.
When it comes to lead generation, LinkedIn works very well for me. But I got to tell you, lately it's getting to be a pain. I'm getting bombarded with solicitations. Things like, I'm an expert in Apple Podcast. Let me help you promote your podcast. I'm an expert in marketing books. I'd like to help you market your book. This goes on day after day. So tell me, Daniel, how do I and my listeners, who I assume are going through very much the same thing, how do we deal with this? What should we do?
I'm afraid there are two parts to the answer. Part one is don't be that person yourself when you send an invitation request, but that I don't need to mention that to you. So we'll move to the second part. I ignore probably 90% of incoming LinkedIn invitations, but I'll tell you what I'll do with the 10% that intrigue me. And that means 10% of people I don't really recognize, but they look interesting. They usually send a default, I'd like you to join a professional network on LinkedIn. They don't say, Jane Doe has mentioned you, please get in touch. So there's a link I could share with you in the show notes that enables you to reply to incoming LinkedIn invitations without accepting that invitation. And basically what I would say is, thank you very much for the invitation, John. I see that you're with XYZ Corp. I don't recall having worked with you. Can I be of help? Thanks, Daniel. That's it. 30 seconds. As you can imagine, most of them never get back to me. But occasionally there would be someone who says, yes, you know what? I was listening to your chat with Peter George, and I'd like us to maybe discuss an opportunity for you training our organization. And then I would simply treat it as an email or whatever source works for you. And then once I know the person well enough, I will make a note to myself to go and accept that LinkedIn invitation, but you need to have some process. The invitation could be the end of the process. That's my way to do it, or the beginning of a process. And then you will basically try to stay in touch with that person and see how you can help them. So perhaps focus on the 10% that looks intriguing and reply only to those. You can easily delegate it to a VA or someone that has access to your account, and unfortunately ignore the spray and pray invitations that want to sell you things you will never need. And people, it's often automation. You know they haven't visited your profile. The wording is you're doing amazing stuff. If it can be sent to someone else, then that person hasn't taken the minimal time to show they're professionals. So why should you grace them with your time?
I had one recently that said, I see that you're a coach. I work with coaches. One of the great things that coaches can do to get more business is write a book.
That's good.
They offered to help me write a book. And I thought, you have not looked at my profile at all.
Yeah, I noticed that you have two eyes.
Yes, I'd love to work with you. All right, let's get back to us and using LinkedIn as a platform that'll help us grow. When should you focus on sharing content on LinkedIn? And how often should you share that content?
Try to think of your ideal reader and see whether you have produced or you can curate content that is top of funnel, educational, and if possible, evergreen. So let's say you want to help public speakers, grow their business or start getting paid gigs. Then some of the questions they would have would be about confidence, or about their ability to even start performing public speaking. So you analyze, you make a digital portfolio inventory of the content, the blog posts, the podcast, the videos, everything you have written that treats this specific fear. And you, instead of saying, hire me, you say, I had trouble with that myself, and this is how I made it work for me. And I've learned from X and I learned from Y. And you basically help them move from, there's no way I'm going to speak to more than one person at a time, to, you know what, that looks interesting. What would be the next step? And then they would be likelier to go to your website and maybe download the 50 ideas for public speakers and go to the next stage, perhaps book a strategy call or join your list. And at one point or another, they may reach out to you and say, I'd like to start working with you because I like the way you helped other people. And now I'm ready. Maybe the first time they heard your name, they were not ready. They were still struggling with confidence issues, but you help them move to the stage where they say, Peter, help me out. Now I'm ready for my first public speaking, or I have a public speaking in a month. SOS, Peter, please, can you help me?
Is there any frequency that's better?
It's related to your connection strategy. I'll say this. Most of our network is not very interested in seeing too many shares from us. And that means that if I see that every time that person posts the same sort of content that is not relevant to me, then I would basically become increasingly blind to their content. I would see it the first time, I would check it out. The second time, I would barely notice it. The third time, I would simply ignore it. And then if I have the impression that that person has hijacked my feed, I will either disconnect or at least unfollow them. So ask yourself, is this sort of content educational for my network? Because it could be that you're an excellent public speaker, but you connected with people that you've worked with. They're not necessarily your target audience. They're simply colleagues, especially if you're starting out. So find other ways to share that pieces of content and go to specialized groups about books, like you said, or about anything else. And that would be an audience that would be a lot more receptive and interested in the sort of content that you have in mind. There's no frequency I can recommend, because you know what? Okay, every quarter, ask yourself, what is the best piece of content that I read or consumed that is relevant for my network? That means 4 times a year, and that is the minimal amount I would recommend. But if you overdo it, if you share it to death 24/7, at one point there may be a backfire.
You say that exposure on LinkedIn is overrated. How can that be? What's more important than exposure?
I'm glad you asked it, because if you're a public speaker, then 5 event organizer asking you, Peter, can we schedule something for in 2 months' time, would be a lot more relevant exposure than 1,500 people who have no idea about what you're passionate about and the causes you defend and your skills as a public speaker. So it's not that exposure is unimportant, it's that you need to have the right kind of exposure. And by the right kind of exposure, it goes back to who's your ideal reader. And if it's public speakers, then how do I make sure that public speakers will find me? Have I used the right keywords? simply asks a new client of yours, if you had to search for someone with my skill set, what terms would you use? And Peter, because you know so much about your specialty, the terms you will use are sometimes way more specialized than what they would use. The terms that are important, again, are theirs. They may not use the correct terms, but if they call it X, Y, and Z, then there should be a way for you to incorporate the X, Y, and Z, preferably in a story that makes sense for the human eyes, but it does also include the keywords for the LinkedIn algorithm. Confidence, fear of public speaking, engagement, shows, all those terms could be weaved into an interesting story with the right keywords, but when we read it, we would be thrilled to know what the next step is.
So including those keywords is very much like SEO.
Yes, sir. It's LinkedIn SEO, basically. Yes. And the important thing to remember is that LinkedIn does index everything from your headline to your about section, to your experience section, and even skills. So if you wanted to have to maybe one way to look at it, say I'm looking for a public speaker coach, and the term I would use is Zoom. Why would I use Zoom? Because now I know that I don't have to live in Providence, Rhode Island in order to hire you. I could be located in the other part of the country or the state or the world. So if you understand the terms that people will use, then you will simply add a sentence, say, I provide one-on-one consulting via physical meetings or virtual, Zoom, XYZ, and then, hop, I will find you.
I'm going to take that tip.
I'm going to check your website tomorrow.
The vast majority of clients are on Zoom, and I don't know if I use that or not. I'll have to check that out. That's the great thing about interviewing people for a podcast. I learn as well. Let's talk about introductions now. Is there such a thing as a perfect introduction? And how is it affected by your strategy?
Okay, so I will try to suggest two quick things. If I send you an invitation request, there are two scenarios. One is that we know each other. We may have worked together 2 or 3 years ago, and then I would try to customize the message and say, Peter, last year we worked at the Rhode Island business competition, and I didn't get to the final, but I wanted to thank you for your help, and I'd like you to be part of my network. Just taking the time to include something that's specific will make you more likely to accept that invitation request. So you don't have to make it up. You can say, basically, I was listening to the public speaking with Peter George, and I liked your interview with X, Y, and Z. And that's what I want to connect. Even that is fine. You don't have to show something else. There's a second kind of introduction, and that is, I would like your help with introducing me to a third party. Say I would like to introduce me to Cheryl West Long, who was a guest on your podcast. Then I would try to reach out to you and say, why would I like to speak with Cheryl? Because I gain a lot of information from the way you two discussed what happens backstage for the event organizers and the traps to avoid, and how to recognize what would be the next step, and what to do on D-Day when there's an event going on and you have some last minute change. So I'll try to understand that when you put your name on the line, you take a risk. If you accept to introduce me to Cheryl, then you would put your reputation on the line, and I need to treat Cheryl in the best professional way. And that means I will try to show you that I've done my homework, and that when I reach out to her, it's for something specific that she may be interested in. If I manage to show you what's in it for her, you are way likelier to make that introduction. So it boils down to one word: research.
Daniel, this has been excellent. We've delved into a great deal of LinkedIn. Well, I'm sure we've barely scratched the surface. Where can people connect with you, learn more about you and the services you provide?
Thank you very much, Peter. It's been a pleasure on my end. It's danielalfon.com.
It's easy enough. That will be in the show notes. Daniel, thanks so much for being here with us.
Thank you, Peter.
That's a wrap of another episode of Public Speaking with Peter George. Be sure to tune in again for a conversation with another public speaking expert. And remember to use the link in the show notes to go to Amazon and check out Peter's acclaimed book, The Captivating Public Speaker.